So, I was thinking on my drive home from work today that I'd make a video, it'd be a rambling video. I'm not sure if it'll connect to games or running a game store or anything like that. Just some thoughts I had in my head that I wanted to get out. And I don't know, I just felt like making a video. So, I don't know if you've watched other videos of mine, sometimes I reference the fact that I'm a trucker. I drive lots of different vehicles, from, my own personal vehicle to, a forklift to a straight truck to sometimes a pickup truck at the like a work pickup just to do one delivery out in the middle of nowhere. But most often I'm driving a dual axle tractor with a 53-foot trailer with barn doors. That's what I've done most of my trucking life. Starting in 2016, I started doing long distance trucking. And I started off driving mostly to British Columbia from Ontario. And if you're not from Canada and you're not from Ontario and you've never gone to BC from Ontario, you won't necessarily know how big Ontario is. I remember in the 90s, and this is probably connected to something later on that I'm talking about, but in the 90s, before the World Wide Web, before you could just Google anything, often we'd have arguments, and we would talk about something. Someone would bring up something, and then to resolve the issue, either we just agree to disagree, or someone would later bring the information, and then the discussion would be reopened. Nowadays, you can just Google stuff and disprove someone wrong, with as long as there's enough data to actually support it. But anyway, so I remember my friends at college. They lived off campus in one of those, the landlords rent to a bunch of college people in this little, circle of houses or whatever. And we were arguing about the size of Ontario. And I said 3 Germanys fit in Ontario. And they didn't really believe me. So I called the German consulate to confirm it. That's kind of how I would operate. I often called the White House to confirm different things about, the political situation between Canada and the United States or whatever. Back when, you could do stuff like that. I'm not even sure if you could get anybody to talk to you at the White House these days. Anyway, that's besides the point. My point is that my first 6 months to a year, it was a year of driving from Ontario to BC. Now, I had driven from Ontario to British Columbia once out and then once back in 2000. It was 2008, May of 2008, I believe. I drove to British Columbia, and then when I got to Vancouver, I started looking for a job because I had a total of $500, and I eventually found a job at an East Coast, fish and chip, not a fish and chips place, more like a East Coast seafood restaurant. Now, the best seafood is found out by Vancouver. So, even though it's on the West Coast, an East Coast restaurant probably has, better food other than lobster. There's more lobster on the East Coast. But for, for instance, sushi in Vancouver is way better than sushi anywhere else I've had it, including when I was in Japan. The sushi in Vancouver is just amazing, mostly due to the sockeye salmon. Those orca really know what they're talking about. Anyway, in 2008, I got to Vancouver and found a job at a seafood restaurant, and then as a busser at a nightclub where I made tons of money just bussing. I was like anywhere from $200 to $300 a night bussing. It was weird. And then halfway through the summer, I got a job at eBay. And then at the end of the summer, I stopped working at the seafood restaurant, and I kept working at the nightclub because it paid so much. And then eventually, about somewhere in 2009, I stopped working at the nightclub because it was just like Friday nights and Saturday nights. It would go because like the bars would be open in Vancouver until 3 a.m. and the people wouldn't be gone until 4 a.m. and we'd have to clean up until 5 a.m. And having a daytime job was kind of exhausting. And eBay was paying enough. It was paying bills. So then eventually we got laid off in Vancouver. This video is really rambling. I'll get back to the trucking in a second. Anyway, it got laid off in Vancouver, and I was the only one happy when because they were shutting down the eBay location because they were moving all the jobs to Salt Lake City because of the 2008 market meltdown and Obama's policy of tax breaks for having more American workers. And I was the only one happy about that because it meant I could go back to Ontario because Vancouver's okay, but I was kind of done with living in Vancouver. Anyway, so then you flash forward to 2016, and I'm a truck driver, and I'm driving out to BC again. And I already knew how long it took to get out of Ontario if you're heading out west and you're not going through the United States. So it's quicker to get to the west coast of Canada through the United States because you got to go all the way around the Great Lakes in Ontario to get to the west. And that trip, so like from Toronto, which is in the south and it's the most populous city in Canada, to Thunder Bay, which isn't the end of Ontario. It's just basically about as far as you could drive in your personal vehicle. You can't actually do this drive in a commercial vehicle because your hours of operation would run out well before that. You'd have to stop before Nipigon, probably somewhere north of Sault Ste. Marie, I think you might get. Anyway, so I would drive, when I drove my personal vehicle out, it took 19 hours to drive from Toronto to Thunder Bay. And I'm the kind of person who doesn't have to stop to relieve myself a lot. And I just needed a coffee and I had a bunch of food in the car and I would munch while I would drive and then I would have dinner at the end of the night. Anyway, it took I think it was 4.5 days to drive to Vancouver in my personal vehicle. And it takes roughly that to drive in a commercial vehicle. You just got to stop more. But we were doing what was called team driving, which was 2 drivers. One guy is in the bunker sleeping while the other guy drives, and then they switch, right? So then the truck runs 24/7. And in that case, you can get to Vancouver in 2.5 days, I think. Anyway, so my first sort of trucking job, real trucking job, because I had some smaller delivery trucking jobs in the 90s and then also just before this commercial vehicle thing. So it started in the winter, and so I had to basically, trial by fire, drive through northern Ontario in the winter, which is pretty hellish, and seeing all the trucks in the ditch as you're leaving Ontario. Mostly between Cochrane and Nipigon. There were a lot of people that couldn't, handle driving with a little bit of ice and snow on the road and winds and low visibility. And then it takes about 24 hours of driving to get from Toronto, which is where you normally get freight from, to the border of Ontario and Manitoba. And then about an hour from that is Winnipeg, right? The next big city after, once you get out of Ontario. I mean, Thunder Bay is probably almost as big as Winnipeg, maybe half the size, but it's still, Thunder Bay is pretty big. And then there's North Bay and Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury, which are somewhere around similar sizes to Winnipeg. Anyway, so you go to Winnipeg, and then you go to Regina, and then you go to Calgary, and then you enter into the mountains in the winter. And that is a real trial by fire in a commercial vehicle, if that's your first trucking job. And I had a partner who was, he was a seasoned driver. He was a Polish guy who had driven, in Russia past the Urals. So he was just he just knew how to drive in winter conditions in the mountains. And he taught me a lot. So I was very comfortable driving through the mountains in the winter. Sometimes it was a little bit hairy. Never had to chain up. Just happened to either shut down before you had to chain up, or it happened to get through before yeah. Anyway, the point is, I spent a lot of time going back and forth between Ontario and BC. Sometimes we would be out we'd be out for at least a week, if not 2, 3. And I think the longest with him was like 4 weeks, and then we came back. We would take like a week off or something like that. And then because I stopped doing the team driving, the company stopped sending me far, and my whole thing was that I wanted to go far and smoke. Whenever I was hired by a trucking company to ask me what I wanted to do, that's what I wanted to do. So they started just sending me to Indiana and Michigan and sometimes Chicago, which is not what you want to do as a long distance driver, because as a long distance driver, your pay is based on your miles, right? And the mile rate of like, say, 33 cents a kilometer or 25 cents a mile. I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe it was 33 cents a mile, because I think they still calculated stuff in miles, just because the most common thing is using the imperial system in logistics, because there's more stuff moving in America than there is in Canada, right? And there's more stuff moving from Canada to America. Anyway, the point is that if the truck isn't moving, you're not making money if you're a long distance driver. So you want to go as far as you can, because that means you're going to be moving more often, right? If you're only going like 8 hours away, and then you're dropping the trailer and picking up another trailer, or you're getting live unloaded and live loaded, or whatever, then that downtime is you not getting paid unless they keep you for longer than 2 hours when they're unloading or loading you, right? And so if you go 8 hours and then you get unloaded, and then you go somewhere else and get loaded, and then you go back to your terminal in Ontario for 8 hours and then get a new trailer and then go out. The point is, all those downtimes add up a lot quicker than going out for 4 days, getting unloaded, going somewhere for a couple hours, getting loaded, and then spending another 4 days going back. And actually, the best trip for an Ontario trucker is to go from Toronto to Salt Lake City and then back, because that uses pretty much all your hours, because you have to after a certain number of hours, which I've now forgotten because I haven't done long distance driving in a while, and the kind of driving I do never uses up all my hours. But you basically, once you've hit, it's 140 hours. Yeah, it's 140 hours. You have to stop for 36 hours. You can't drive, right? So often you would just park your truck in a truck stop, and you would stay there for a day and a half, and then you would start driving again, and your hours would reset. So that never happened when they were just sitting in Indiana and in Michigan. All the shutdowns would mostly be at home, but it started to annoy me because I wanted to go out west, or at least down to like Florida, Texas, something like that, right? Something that's far away. And they never gave me those jobs. And it was because I wasn't doing team driving anymore. So then I went somewhere else. And I went to another trucking company that did let me go out west. And then eventually I got sick of driving through Wyoming in the winter. It's just the worst. And I didn't have to drive through Colorado in the winter, because the company didn't want to, because they didn't want to deal with any of the insurance issues of dealing with Colorado in the winter. But they still went through Wyoming. And then I talked to them at some point and convinced them, yeah, send me out west in spring, summer, fall, and then just start finding me stuff in like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida for the winter. And they, for the most part, did that. Sometimes I had to go out west in the winter, but for the most part I did. And it was pretty good. And what was oh yeah. So now I'm not a long distance trucker. I do what's called roaming. So I work for a truck company that they have terminals all over Ontario, and also some in Quebec, and then out west as well, although I haven't been to any of those terminals because I stay mostly in Ontario. And when they have people that are either sick or on vacation or have any other off time, I cover that. And I don't just cover that where I am, which is around the Barrie area. I also go out to like places like Kingston. You'll often see in my videos my location is in Kingston or in Huntsville. And then recently Rouen, Quebec, and Listowel. And those I haven't. That's like I rarely ever go to those places. And Listowel was the first time I went there, and so the last few weeks have been particularly exhausting for me because also I don't just cover day shift stuff. I cover afternoon shift and night shift stuff. So sometimes I have to work nights, and then the next week I have to work days. But that is okay for me because I sleep a minimum of 8 hours a night, so I don't have any issues of exhaustion because flipping over for me is relatively easy because I've been doing it for a long time. I often work nights and then had to do stuff during the day so I can flip over my hours and stay up all day on the weekends. So I cover the night shift, and so early in this month I was in Rouen, which is Quebec, and they don't really plow the roads as well as Ontario. Ontario uses a heck of a lot of salt, as everyone will notice, and that's why we can see the pavement almost all winter long, is because we use liberal amounts of salt on our major highways, which is good. Even if I wasn't trucking, I would think it was good, and I would be annoyed at any politician that suggested we lower the amount of salt. So, anyway, and because I've seen road conditions where they don't do that. I mean, they don't even plow in Wyoming. I mean, they let the winds clear the road and clear the trucks off the road. So, and in Quebec, they use mostly sand and I guess a little bit of salt, but not really that much. And then out west in Calgary, they just use gravel, and there's just people in the ditch all the time out in Alberta. Anyway, so I would drive from Rouen at night down to North Bay, which is funny because North Bay is really far north, right? But Rouen is further north than that. And I would be driving on these Quebec roads, and I'd be driving quite slow because as you've noticed, wherever you are, you're probably having a particularly bad winter, and everyone is, and Quebec too. And these roads at night are pretty precarious at times. So I'd be driving really slow in Quebec, and then the minute I get into Ontario, there's pavement everywhere, and I can just drive at normal speed. It's pretty cool. But it's exhausting to do that, to drive on shitty roads with shitty plowing for any length of time. And then I went to Listowel, and it was even worse. And it's on Ontario, but the thing is, there's been a blizzard. Well, I guess it's over now, but last week was really, really bad in a lot of places. I'm sure wherever you are, it was bad. Maybe not as bad as it was in Listowel, but relative to where you are, it was probably bad. In Listowel, it was like a 5-day blizzard. From Monday, it was, whiteout conditions and quite windy and snow all over the road. And on the Tuesday, it was less so, but because of what had happened on Monday, it was, the plows hadn't, been able to clear the main roads, let alone the side roads. And then on Wednesday, the weather picked up again. It got windy again and some more snow. And then on Thursday, it went blizzardy again. And all the roads were closed out of Listowel, including the road to my hotel, which was annoying. So like that hotel that I was at, because my company puts me up in a hotel whenever I'm not at my main terminal. And I end up, having to go to this hotel, and the road is closed. And then there's a whole lot of people at this hotel now because they're all trapped in this town. And also that day on a side road, there was like a 15-car pileup that I came across. Obviously, it didn't affect me, except that I had to wait there for an hour until I could back up to the next side road and then go over. And then the next road that I went down, that was actually okay. But yeah, it was a pretty terrible accident. I think 3 ambulances went in and out. And I wasted most of my day, an hour of my day stuck there. And I could have gotten back to my hotel before the road got closed. But yeah, so that whole week was just exhausting and annoying. And I mean, it's part of my job, so whatever. My point is that, I've been working now just at my main terminal, driving from Barrie up to North Bay and back. And, there's extra little things I got to do. And I'm just a little bit tired. And I wanted to make a I'm tired video and just talk about different things. And, I think that the difference in the way that people look at the world is just kind of interesting. And my perspective, so you have other people that have game stores that they come from different things, right? Rudy talks about having, work in restaurants and, worked at his family's business supplying food to a military base, which I probably delivered to at some point in time. I delivered to a military base in Pensacola, and there was another military base somewhere on the east side of Florida that I delivered to as well. But anyway, he worked in restaurants, and he was also a mechanic. But then he went and got all this licensing to be a broker and worked for important, financial firms with, basically dealing with wealthy people's portfolios. But then the 2008 crash happened, much like it happened for me, and I left eBay. I left Vancouver, went back to Ontario. I went into security. Rudy had the whole time been interested in magic and buying magic and then also selling magic at this point. And I had stopped, with magic in 97, basically. And I wasn't even aware that magic was still a thing until about, 2008, 2009. I thought it had basically died or went away. And then you have Louis. I'm not sure what stuff he was doing before he opened his store, but his wife's a nurse, and he decided that he wanted to have his own business, and he did quite well at that. I don't know RNG's background. He started selling singles, and Louis did that as well, and that's how they funded eventually opening the store. And Kevin Fangaro Games had been a YouTuber doing Rogue Deck Builder because of some pejorative someone used against him because they didn't like the deck that he built, and he called it a rogue deck. And so he's been the longest on YouTube, but his was a player bent and a competitive bent and a deck building kind of look. But then he opened his own store 2 years ago, and he had already been, sort of buying the cards that he needed for competitive scene and then selling the ones he didn't to fund his activities. So he was kind of, an old hat at dealing with like TCG Player and eBay and that kind of stuff. So he kind of knew how the market went. And then there's Mason at Cardinal Gaming. And I, again, don't know his background, but he's had a store for a very long time from what I can tell. The oldest store that I know of, on YouTube, is Dirium's, which if you watch old Alpha Investments videos, he'll talk about Dirium's a lot. And not enough people talk about Dirium's these days. They really should, because they were the sort of OG, this is how to run a store. And a lot of their videos on how to open and run a store are relevant to this day if the numbers aren't exactly the same. And, obviously the sets are very different, and the way that Magic product comes out is very different, and the different other products that were coming out at the time were, either don't exist or aren't as important anymore. But Magic and Pokemon are basically the same. And now we have new card games and that kind of thing. But anyway, if anyone is watching this and, you like talking about, how a store runs, whether or not you plan to open up a store or not, you just like that kind of content, and you haven't watched any of these other guys, you should watch them. But specifically, you should watch Dirium's, because they have just so many videos. And one type of video they had was Kevin from Dirium's and his partner I can't remember his name. They would sit at a table and they would discuss the day-to-day operations of a store, the different questions people had about how to open a store and how to run a store. And the Diriams would show his back end on eBay and stuff like that. He was just very transparent about everything. But then they had something called Card Shop Life, which is just an amazing series of videos in which it was one or two people that would basically just film the day-to-day of the store, not necessarily running the store, but the customers, and when they had events and when people would come in and trade cards. So there would be customers talking about things with the employees of the store, and it's just very wholesome, I guess. And that's, I don't know, they were very enjoyable videos back in 2013, 2014 when I used to watch them. And I watched them religiously, like a lot of people did, like Rudy did. That's why his series of opening a store is called Card Shop Life. It's referencing that, even though Diriam, when they were talking about opening and running a store, they didn't call that part Card Shop Life. It's just, that was synonymous with Diriams. I don't know whether the channel is now called Diriams again, but at some point they changed the name to just a channel, because I don't know exactly why they did that. Because maybe they were focusing on another channel they had that was doing Pokemon. Anyway, it's just a great channel that you should go check. I'll try to remember to put a link in the doobly-doo below. If not, it's pretty easy to find Diriams. So that's kind of, both Diriam and Alpha Investments were sort of an inspiration for me. I'd already been thinking for years about opening a game store, but like everyone else, you're thinking about it, and then you have people that telling you why it's a bad idea to do it, like your friends, or what you should be doing, and and then you're doing all this other life stuff. And I'm a trucker, so I'm not even in the province for weeks on end, sometimes several months. And it wasn't until I got this job that's mostly local. I often have to go away, as I said, to cities that are anywhere from 1 to 6 hours away from where I am and stay there for the weekdays. And then Matt runs the store during the week, and then I'm often there on weekends. So anyway, that is one way of, opening a store, is you have a good paying full-time job that's funding the first few years where you're not profitable, because that's usually how it goes. Or, as Rudy says, you have to have $100K in like seed money, or like so that you can be liquid, and that's separate from all the other money you're going to spend on opening the store. I keep scratching my nose because mustache. Anyway, so as I said, I've been working all night, kind of tired, and just thinking about this kind of stuff about how people come from different walks of life, and how a store is sort of a unique experience. There's things that are shared amongst all of us, that things that we've all had to do, and actions we've all had taken, and headwinds we've all faced, and wins we've all faced to different degrees, but there's something very similar. So if you actually have a plan to open a store, it is good to watch Diriams, Alpha Investments, RNG Games, Kitchen Table, TCG, Gone Rogue Games, and Cardinal Gaming, just to get the feel of what maybe to expect. And in the order that I think, RNG Games probably has the best videos that are specific to opening and running a store, whereas Alpha Investments has early videos that are like that, but then also many of his early videos aren't about that at all. They're just about investing in cardboard and the marketplace. But he has a specific playlist of when he opened his store which I think he's closed at this point in time, but he probably still has the physical location. It's just I think there were too many people showing up at the store and he couldn't get any work done. So now he's got warehouses, but he probably still has that store somewhere. Anyway, so RNG Games is probably the most up-to-date version of it, and Dirium's is the most transparent of it. And I think RNG Games is heavily influenced by Dirium's too, because he had his running a store series as the third volume of that, and so Dirium's would be the first volume, Alpha Investments would be the second volume, his would be the third volume, and that's why I made mine the fourth volume, because neither Gone Rogue Games nor Kitchen Table TCG nor Cardinal Gaming made a Card Shop Life Volume 4, so I took it, right? Whether or not I deserve it or not, I took it. Anyway, so RNG Games is up to date. Dirium's is very transparent and detailed, and then Alpha Investments is very regimented, right? And then he's got whiteboard videos that talk about even more of the concepts of remaining liquid and that kind of stuff. And then he was the one that I guess pioneered this Patreon system where you get a bunch of people that are paying you a monthly fee, and then you then provide to them from time to time things that are close to wholesale price, and some things you even that Alpha Investments takes a loss on to provide to their customers. And that's a business model that he's done, and I don't think anyone else has managed to even come close to that level, except for maybe PokeNE, who is a Pokemon Magic the Gathering, Pokemon YouTuber who basically just talks about running a Pokemon business. He probably gets Magic the Gathering product, and he probably sells Magic the Gathering product, but he focuses mostly on Pokemon, and he gets a lot of Japanese Pokemon, or at least that's what fueled his early business. But I think now, it seems to me to be primarily English Pokemon. I don't think he needs to get as much Japanese Pokemon as he used to, or maybe he gets as much as he used to, but I think the percentage of English to Japanese Pokemon has flipped. Anyway, he also has a lot of transparency and detail on his stuff, but it's focused on Pokemon, and there's almost nothing on Magic the Gathering or board games or anything like that. And I can't think of anyone who runs just a board game store, but Gone Rogue Games often talks about board games, but doesn't really focus on board games that much. From time to time he'll mention, because he also likes playing board games. And then there's Lord of War Games, and they are primarily focused on war games, miniature games, mostly Warhammer, right? And they have a lot of it's basically two talking heads. Again, I can't remember the names, but they talk about just running a game store, and they probably sell Pokemon and Magic, but their primary focus is on Games Workshop and Warhammer, and then also other miniatures games like I don't know whether like Trench Siege, or I don't know. There's a bunch of other miniature games I'm not that familiar with, and they'd make quite good videos. Oh, there's another store called MTG North, but they mostly just do mass box openings of collector booster boxes, which I don't know. I presume they're. I don't know whether they're doing box breaks or whether they're selling the singles on TCG Player. I've watched a few of their videos, but since it's mostly box openings, I don't really. I don't think it's been months since I've watched a video of theirs, but I think from time to time, they will talk about, the day-to-day of a store intermixed with them opening up cards, but there's not a lot of information in that regard on that channel. Anyway, I don't know the backgrounds of any of the other ones that I mentioned besides Alpha Investments, because he talked a lot about his background, and then Gone Rogue Games because he's been on YouTube for a while, but I don't know what he did before YouTube. And then Dirium, I don't think he talked about his background that much, but he provided a lot of detail on when they first opened the store, and they've been around for a long time, like the mid 2000s, I think. And the only other person I know the background of is the professor at Tulare Community College, because he was an adjunct professor at some California college, but then got laid off, and then he got a huge Patreon, and he deserved it, and he made a ton of better content and more often content, and now he's the king of Magic the Gathering YouTube. And there's other Magic the Gathering YouTubers that talk about the marketplace or playing or Commander or this or that, but they're not focused on running a store, and you probably know them. And, there'll be more YouTubers talking about Magic the Gathering, and, it's a pretty great little, group of people, and I think there should be more collabs between people. There was going to be back in 2014-ish, there was going to be like a convention at Dirium's with Tulare Community College, and I think Gone Rogue Games and Wedge, and then also Jeremy Hambley. What the hell was his channel name before he was the Quartering? Anyway, they were going to have a convention, but then there was bickering about various things, and that kind of fell apart. And unfortunately, that kind of ended collaborations between YouTubers. I mean, at certain conventions, once or twice, Tolarian and Alpha Investments did a video together, but they didn't do what people normally think of as collabs. And I think RNG Games had mentioned that he was going to go visit Mason at Cardinal Gaming, but I haven't seen those videos yet. And I presume he was going to visit other people. I don't think he was going to come to Canada and visit me, because I don't know if he even knows I exist. And also, even though he's, I think, in Ohio, Americans don't like to, cross borders that much, right? So maybe he likes going to Canada. Who knows? Anyway, he's invited to come visit my dinky little store. So it's just interesting how there's these various different people that are all wildly different. Obviously, I'm, old, bald, fat, and the others are not. And while I might be the oldest among all of them, I think the most experienced is probably Rudy at this point. He's got the connections that people, insider information that people will talk to him about, and then the amount of Patreons that talk about things, so he can be connected to what people are thinking, but also he kind of figured out the market and how these things work, both with Pokemon and with Magic the Gathering. And a lot of the other stores besides Dirium's are kind of following in his footsteps, right? The reason that they have and I have the information that we have is because Alpha Investments provided that to us, and Dirium's also provided that to us. And now all of us are still providing that to any future up-and-comers. Now we'll see, because we're in this marketplace where we don't know where it's going. Like, we've had 2025, this, as Rudy puts it, greatest bull market ever in cardboard. But is that continuing? Are we in a consolidation period and we're going to hit another leg up? Or are things going to really cool off and possibly head towards a crash? We don't really know. But usually what happens at that point in time is the people that are in it now become over capitalized in it, and they can't handle the bad times. So stores close down, scalpers disappear, investors start buying, at least the ones that have been in it for a while, and they understand what's happening. But and YouTubers and influencers on like Instagram or X or whatever, they also disappear because they're getting less engagement, right? And if they were getting, revenue from whatever social network they're using, they're getting less of it, and then they can't justify the time they put towards it, that it's not growing anymore, or that they never made money off of it and they don't think they're ever going to, so then they quit. So you could probably go back into old YouTube videos about Magic the Gathering and see a lot of people that used to make a lot of videos that don't anymore. And I can't even remember all their names, right? But then there's other people. It's mostly from 2020 onwards, there was a huge new group of both Pokemon channels and Magic the Gathering channels. And a lot of those from 2020 and 2021, like I would say 80% of them just stopped making content. And then the 20% that hung on kept making content, but dealt with the fact that they were making less money from it, or that they were getting less views or whatever. And then there was another upsurge, right? And maybe some of the ones that had made things in 2020 came back and started making more content, or they had moved to different games, different things, or whatever. And that will probably happen again, is that you might have a favorite YouTube channel that will just disappear if there's a crash. And that'll be sad if that happens, but I recommend holding on. I'm not making a single dollar on any of these videos, and it's probably going to take a long time for me to get monetized if I do, because I talk about too many things on my channel, and the algorithm has trouble recommending. So the way that the algorithm works, I guess we're doing a YouTube tutorial now about, as Rudy puts it, we'll wrap up the video because we're halfway through at 40 minutes. So basically what happens is you put out a video and the algorithm sends it to the feeds of subscribers, but only a small number of them. And then based on how many of those click on it, then it expands it to subscribers and probably to non-subscribers at this point. And then based on how many of those click on it, it then expands that. But it's based on, like, what kind of content does this person watch that clicked on it, right? So then it'll also recommend it to other people that watch the same content as that person, and so on and so forth. But if people only watch Magic the Gathering market content and they don't watch Magic the Gathering deck building content, right? Like, I don't watch Magic the Gathering deck building content. So if I was watching a YouTuber that talked about market stuff, and then every other day they made videos about deck building, and I don't watch those videos, like it comes in my feed and I just don't click on them, then it'll stop recommending the other ones as well, and also to other people. So that if you aren't focused on one thing, it just makes it harder for the algorithm to figure out who wants to watch these things, right? Because it confuses the algorithm. But I think over time, the algorithm will figure out my channel and will figure out who wants to watch these videos. And I've just got to be patient. Or I'm absolutely wrong, and that's never going to happen. And the fact that I've been making a video a day now since April of last year, and also I've been making videos for 3 years in total, but not a video every day. It will have been for nothing, but not really for nothing, because that's my point, or my goal isn't really lots of views and monetization. I actually find it, therapeutic. I like talking to a camera about this stuff. And if there's a few people who watch it and disagree with me, or agree with me, or just enjoy watching the video, it's really enough for me. I don't need any more. More would be nice, but it's not necessary. Anyway, maybe, I don't know. It could be the Gen Xer in me, which is something I was going to talk about. I don't remember why I was going to talk about it, this idea of generations. But it's kind of what makes me different than everybody else. even Rudy, because I don't think he's right. He might be Generation X. Anyway, I don't really believe in generations. Cohorts is probably a better word for these things, but there is something about Generation X that intrigues me now because of millennials and Generation Z and whatever's Alpha or whatever. That, and then also in comparison to the Boomers. So, what Generation X is, and the people have changed the definition of it for some reason, which is, I just don't agree with changing the definition, because the reason that we started talking about generations all the time is because in the early 90s or mid 90s, Douglas Copeland, a Canadian writer, wrote a book called Generation X. And then from then on, people just couldn't shut up about generations. Because I don't think before that, like, there was the greatest generation, the guys that fought in World War I, and then there were the boomers, who were the children of the people that fought in World War II. I think that the people in between the great generation and boomers are called the lost generation. But people didn't constantly talk about generations. They constantly talked about baby boomers. That's true. Because baby boomers were the most important thing in the West, especially in North America. Like, baby boomers were the shit. They drove everything from the minute they were born, right? There was more housing because families needed housing, and then there was more schools because there were so many of these kids, they needed to go to schools. Then there were more toys because they needed stuff for Christmas. And then then they became hippies, and the counterculture movement and mass protests everywhere. And then they went in, then, a lot of them became yuppies and then moved into corporate America. And then they just became the leaders of everything, and they ran every corporation and every government, right? So they're basically, until, like, they're starting, they've already, in the last 10 years, they've been mostly passing away, right? Because they're old. But for 50, since the 1950s, they've been the most important thing, but mostly in childhood. And then when they became adults in, I guess, just before the 1970s, they were, now starting to run stuff, or at least starting to enter the workplace, right? And then by the time I was a teenager in the 90s, they were running stuff, right? And so basically from the 90s until about the mid-2010s, they were just in charge of everything. And the world was based on their world outlook. And that's just the way it was. So what Generation X was, to get back to that, the children of baby boomers, right? So technically, I'm not Generation X, even though I'm born at the same time as the midpoint of Generation X. I'm born in the mid 70s, because my parents were born before the end of World War II, right? So to be a baby boomer, you had to be born after World War II, and to be Generation X, you had to be the child of someone born after World War II. And that's the way Generation X was defined by Douglas Copeland, who came up with the term, and that's how it was discussed throughout the 90s and early 2000s when Generation X was discussed. But then millennials came along, and so they're Generation Y, I guess. And that muddied the waters between Generation X, the dates of Generation X, because there weren't fixed dates. It's just, are they children of baby boomers, right? So technically, a lot of millennials are probably just Generation Xers. But maybe they're a little bit different if they're younger, because one of the key points of Generation X is that our parents paid very little attention to us, right? And for the most part, again, it's a cohort. People are different, whatever. But as a generalization, Generation X was largely ignored. And it's also the smallest generation, like very few Generation Xers. And in fact, I was born in 1976, and that's the least amount of kids born in probably a 100-year period. So Generation X were largely ignored, but also this is the generation whose both parents were in the workforce, whereas before that, mom stayed home, dad provided for the family, right? But by Generation X, almost everyone, their mom worked either part-time or full-time. Very few people had a stay-at-home mom in Generation X. So we wore keys around our necks. And when we came home from school, the house was empty. We locked the doors so we wouldn't get kidnapped, I guess. And then we took care of ourselves until our parents came home. And then we may even make dinner for ourselves. We had chores to do. And then a lot of our life was was us leaving the house, getting on our bikes, joining a little gang of kids, biking around the neighborhood, or finding a house that had a bunch of bikes on the lawn, and then that's where all the kids were. And we were explorers. We were people that basically took care of ourselves, raised ourselves, feral children, basically. And that's kind of how we act today. And we get largely ignored because we're the smallest cohort, and no one really understands us. We don't have anything in common with baby boomers, and we don't have anything in common with millennials. But millennials and baby boomers have a little bit in common, and they actually get along a little bit. Except then, the millennials started calling them boomers and okay boomer and that kind of stuff. But even then, the baby boomers are desperate for the acceptance of the millennials and the Gen Zers. They desperately want to be seen as important by the youth. Whereas, as far as I know, Gen X doesn't give a shit. We don't care what you think about us. We've never cared what anyone thinks about us because no one ever thought about us and no one ever gave a shit about us. At least from the Gen X perspective, we're basically a generation of whiners, right? If you can go watch old Gen X movies, there's some called Gen X, and there's some like Reality Bites and stuff like that, and you can tell the cynicism. Basically we think everyone screwed us, and that our future is ruined and stuff like that. But you clearly see our future isn't ruined. You can find Gen Xers everywhere with their little tendrils everywhere. But what are they doing? They're not giving a shit because we've never given a shit. We just want to be left alone. We want to do our own thing. And if you guys want to burn the world, we'll watch it. And we're not interested in, what other people think. There are some Generation Xers who are more like the boomers, and they want acceptance from the youth, and they want to let people know that they're virtuous people and that they are, that they care about causes and stuff like that. And, I did go to a lot of protests when I was younger, mostly to photograph stuff. But I think generally, those are just some vocal, on the outside kind of Gen Xers that still think that that attention matters, that acceptance matters, that being part of society matters. Whereas most Gen Xers are like, I like watching movies. I like playing video games. I just want to be left alone. And when you have an attitude like that, you could basically, be quite successful because you don't get bummed out by, shifting trends and stuff like that. You're like, this is what we're doing now. I guess this is what we're doing now, right? And it's kind of funny because like when I'm at work, and there are other Gen Xers at work, and I can tell because they also don't. They work hard. They show up on time because this is just ingrained in Gen X because it was ingrained in in baby boomers and the older generation, and we tend to be workaholics a bit because that's just what you had to be. Because like it was really hard to get a job in the 90s. Like it was like you had to beg people for really shitty jobs. And by the time 2010s rolled around, it started to get real easy to get jobs. Maybe they weren't the greatest jobs, but I worked in a dog food plant. I once spent 8 hours shoving a cow heart through a grate with a power hose. Right? So I've had some pretty shitty jobs, and every Gen Xers has some really, really shitty jobs. And anyway, so the Gen Xers are just wildly different than other people. And I think one of the things is the technology thing. So when people do talk about Gen X, they talk about one aspect, and it probably is a very important aspect, is that we had a childhood of analog and then an adulthood of digital, right? So we were young enough to experience the world before the world we live in now, before the internet, before computers took over everything, before the phone in your pocket, before before there was even an idea of AI being a real thing other than in science fiction books, right? We grew up in that world, but then we were also young enough to be able to learn technology and to, interface with technology and not be too confused by it. There's some Gen Xers who don't really like technology and are uninterested in it. And also, you can go look up on YouTube. If you put in like a year, like 1993 or 1994 or 1997 or something like that, you might find some old videos that someone has uploaded from the 90s where they took a camcorder through their school, and it's teenagers from the 90s, and what you'll find is almost everyone complains about the idea of someone filming them. But that is not a thing today. Anyway, so we were able to understand technology because we were young enough and our minds were still agile enough. So we experienced both worlds, the end of one world, the beginning of another world. And there's this funny meme that I remember from time to time. This I don't know what picture they're using for it. I can't really remember. But basically, I fix my parents' computer or phone or device or whatever, and then I fix my kids' computer, phone, or device. Are we the only generation who know how to use computers? And that is kind of Generation X. I mean, I remember when I worked at eBay, there were people that were millennials who did something that I'd never seen anyone else do in any other job I did, which was like Alt-Tab and Control-C and Control-V and stuff like that. And that was something that I always did, like the shortcuts on the keyboards. And there are some Gen Xers who were very computery who were like that, but for the most part, 99% of Gen Xers and 100% of baby boomers do not do that stuff, right? They didn't have they hadn't memorized the shortcuts on the keyboard, but a lot of millennials, like I would say 50% of them did. So I'd say millennials are pretty good with computers, but I don't think that they know a lot of they're good at programming, but if they're not working in a field, in an IT type field, then they know almost nothing about the back end of computers, like the MS DOS or what would it be today. Basically, they can't go through the file system of a computer without using Windows, right? And so they have limited understanding of computers, and especially Gen Zers and Gen Alphas. They're good with touch screens and clicking things and apps and that kind of stuff. But again, I would say that a lot of them, unless they're again going into an IT field, aren't very familiar with computers. So we are this kind of in-between people that have sort of a connection to both sides, but also we don't give a shit. So we're not really sharing our knowledge with anybody. We're not trying to lord it over people. We're not trying to run stuff. If we happen to be running stuff, it's by accident because we were the last ones there and we worked hard. And the people that are on YouTube that are doing different YouTubers, I think Tulare Community College is probably a Gen Xer, but I think Rudy is like either a late Gen Xer or an early millennial. I don't know, but again, don't really believe in generations, more cohorts. And Rudy acts like a Gen Xer, so he probably is. But everyone else, Mason probably is too. But I guess Gone Road Games is probably a millennial, and Kitchen Table TCG and RNG Games. Dirium, Gen Xer, very caustic, sarcastic, and doesn't give a shit about your little causes. So this is a very, very rambly video, again, that has nothing to do with gaming and, I don't know, into a long interlude of talking about Generation X, just because I felt like it and I was thinking about it in the car when I was driving. And then talking a lot about truck driving that I don't think anyone really cares about except truck drivers, but that's not what this channel is, and I don't think the algorithm is ever going to put this on a feed for a trucker to see, and let alone is a trucker going to sit through an hour of some guy with board games in the background talking about trucking and then Generation X. But I don't know, I just thought I'd do a rambling video, and I managed to do a full hour of that, and I guess I could do podcasts at this point, right? I was unsure whether I can do a rambling little discussion and say almost nothing, but I think I said a lot too. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and have a good day.